This episode of the Grand Rising Show was brought to you by Autochthonous Assembly, where the real work gets done. Autochthonous Assembly is a gathering of the minds that do the work. Now, for many of our first time subscribers and first time visitors, you may be wondering who Autochthonous Assembly are. You can find this information about our mission statement and our core values on the website at autochthonousassembly.com/about. We are a nonprofit organization dedicated to raising up Indigenous American voices by using genealogy, also known as family history, or your family tree, which is the study of families and the tracing of their lineages and history. Genealogists use oral interviews, historical records, genetic analysis, and other records to obtain information about a family and to demonstrate kinship and pedigrees of its members. Our core values are the foundation of our company, which is essential to our success and serve as a lens through which we evaluate every business decision. Those core values are, but are not limited to, integrity, which is knowing and doing what is right; respect, which is treating others the way you want to be treated; responsibility, which is embracing opportunities to contribute; and servant leadership, which is serving the common good. Now, at Autochthonous Assembly, we have a couple of goals here. And our first goal and foremost of the reason why we do everything that we do is to ensure that we help you do your genealogy and connect back to your tribe and find out where you are from. Everything that we do from the standpoint of the Grand Rising Show and all the information that's posted on the website is dedicated to that one specific purpose, helping you find your genealogy, find your relatives, find your family so that you will know exactly who you are. And if you choose to, tie back into your tribe, whether that tribe is a Native American tribe, an American Indian tribe, whether it's allowing you to determine which house in Africa that you belong to, or what clan of Scandinavia or Europe or France that you belong to. Either way, our goal is to do just that, help you find out who you are so you know exactly where to start. We are not here to tell you who you are, and we're not here to tell you who you are not. We're just here to help you discover your beginnings. Another one of our missions is to help you become financially independent so that you can help your generations for the next 7 generations and be able to put a stable foundation for you and your relatives. And if you should choose to use this information that we provide free of charge to help not only yourself, but your community and your tribe, then we will do everything in our power to make sure that gets done as well. And remember, our goal here is to make sure that we help you get exposed to this information to put you in the best situation possible. So now what I'm going to do now is return it back over to the panel to see if there was anything I missed, and I will go ahead and get set up so we can get ready and get digging into this information. Panel, take it away.
Warning, warning, warning. Hard hats, pickaxe, shovels, boots required.
Grand Rising, everyone. Grand Rising. Peace, peace, peace. Hope all is well. How's everyone doing this rising?
Grand Rising, everybody.
So I see it's another sunny, bright, but breezy rising this way in Georgia.
Oh, you got sun, but you and the breeze. Oh, okay. Okay. You showing off.
No, I mean, it's so bright, it'll fool you. You'll look out the window, go out there with shorts and a t-shirt.
Oh, wow.
Ready instantly.
Yeah, they wasn't even trying to fool us with the sun. It was just cold and gloom, all clouds.
Man, we didn't have a cloud in the sky yesterday, but it was cold.
I do not envy you at all.
Yeah, when we was talking last night, when Courtney was on with us, we was sitting on the fire then.
Yeah, I don't, nope. Give me the sun any day.
And talking about them rabbits, walked up on two of them when I was on my way to the house. I was like, look at it.
It's rabbit season, duck season.
Like what y'all want now?
For real.
Oh, no, it won't be nothing. Mind your business.
They're playing games.
Oh, y'all in the bushes, y'all heard us talking, huh? I'm like, oh yeah, we got him now. You by itself.
Yeah, y'all got something to say? We heard you was talking about us. We just had to show our face.
I don't want no problems. Opened my door, went in, locked it, and closed it right behind me.
Man, I understand.
Other than that, usual. Good thing though. Everybody got their gardens and plants and stuff starting to sprout up.
That's what's up. Yeah, good. Yeah, if this weather keep acting funny, just use hay.
No, because we're able to get straw here. Then we built like the little houses for the cold with the plastic.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and we just surround the garden areas with the plastic and stuff. And we got the little heat lights that we run outside just to keep it warm enough.
Yeah, okay. Oh shoot.
Yeah, the funny thing is it's something that we was doing way before the majority of us got into this all the way.
Yeah.
You know, so the adjustment, it was nothing because it was the majority of us, that's how we live out this side anyway.
Yeah. That's what's up.
Yeah, I forgot. I don't think you was ever on call when I was at my sister-in-law house here, because they got the huge farm there, but they grow like a lot of Caribbean stuff there.
Okay.
Yeah.
I still am open to listen and learn how to grow.
Yeah, because he from Jamaica, but they be growing, he grow corn there, probably like what, less than a mile away from me. They be having corn, all the different peppers, the different fruit. He even grows sugar cane and all that stuff. Yeah.
Really? See, I really do want to learn how to grow sugar cane. I'm about to learn how to grow rice, which I appreciate. But there's certain things that I'm not going to say that it's complicated, but I think it is science or a method to it, a proper way to. I know it's not just throwing some seeds in and it's just good. You got to pay attention to the soil and sun and all those different elements or whatnot. So
yeah,
that's still awesome.
Yeah, we'll be that way this weekend. I just started calling, put it on the camera.
Oh shoot.
And plus, we'll be back up that way, the 13th of this month? So,
Okay.
yeah, I know with sugarcane, I can just bring you the root part, and then you plant it, and you can start your own now.
Okay. Make sure you bring some notes.
Yeah, no problem.
Bring some notes. I like notes. Like reading. And I know once I read it, it's gonna stick.
We trying to grow everything.
I'm trying to tell you, like, no joke. No joke. Grocery store for what? Shout out to the grocery stores. Just saying. My personal preference.
I second that motion.
I even thought about it in my back. Huh?
Plus, in this part of Georgia, we had a space to actually grow
Gotcha.
stuff. You know, so we just expanded it and just pushing it, just expanding it, growing a little bit more, and actually working together. Because at this house, they might be growing these crops, so at the next house, we'll grow something totally different.
Yeah, but that makes all the difference in the world. That is like a really, really beautiful thing, because that's all makes all the difference in the world. Somebody may not be growing this, but this person is. You know, that person may not be growing what these other people are growing. That's a good thing. That's people working together, and that's pretty much, to me, how we should be.
Yeah, because the SBA and the Department of Agriculture, they both less than 10 minutes away from me. I'll pull up, they're like, oh man, here you go again. Yeah, you know it.
But that's good.
I'd be in there like Damu. Don't give me no info then.
For real.
Want me to use it. Don't tell me then.
For real. And it's crazy because now, even with making a call, like how I was telling you yesterday, calling up to the the city building with the water, they was like, oh yeah, and they said my name full, first and last. So I was like, oh, okay. Wasn't negative or anything, but I was just like, oh, this is how it happens. Okay. I'm there.
Got in there, started feeling loose, like, oh, this how I feel. Okay. Oh,
Yeah.
Hey.
Okay. That's what happens. This what it mean when they know your name. Okay. What you heard? I ain't even doing that. No. Nope. It ain't even that. I'm just saying.
All in all, I can say all is good in that part of Georgia.
That's what's up.
Because ain't nothing changed. I mean, in the neighborhood, we still do our same routine. We still conversate. We still get together. So yeah, it's still the same.
But that's what's up. That is what's up. One day when I grow up, I want to be just like you.
I told you, when you come down to visit, you're going to realize everybody in my neighborhood be all the same in a sense. Everybody got a sense of humor.
Oh, yeah. I look forward to laughing then.
Yeah, if you thought last night was something about laughing.
Oh, man, yeah.
On the street
I look forward to laughing.
My whole side hurting. I can't talk to nobody, huh?
Had me laughing. But it was humorous, because sometimes the way people talk and say things makes it even funnier. It's just how they talk that makes it even funnier. But I was also hearing, aged wisdom. It just was funny, but it'll stick.
But then it also shows the different ways the different things that you learn and how to talk to different people by just having conversations, like how we was talking about the census, and we was like, yeah, in our area, for me, it's easier for me to have a conversation when I let people know, hey, you know, by participating in the census, that's $12,000 a household. You got to hear for yourself how that played out. Like, what? Huh? Where I sign that? What we waiting on?
Right. Exactly.
You know, sometimes it's knowing the language of the person, so that way when you give them the info, they can actually clearly understand how it benefits them.
I agree. I absolutely agree. I had gotten you know, those automated calls that they send through the governor, through the city, through the mayor, whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, it was an automated message. So I'm listening to it, and you know, hearing the be careful, be safe, yada yada yada, not being dismissive, I'm just saying. Um, but also when he reflected, like, hey, it's census day, make sure you get out and do the census, based off of how many people did not participate in the census for 2010. You know, this city lost over 400 something odd, I forget the ending numbers, but 400 something odd $1 million in funding. And looking at it, when I pulled up the stats for the city and for the county and everything, I was just like, you know what? I can see, not only could I see how that happened, I can also see where it doesn't, I mean, across the board, all across the board, there weren't people who were counted on the census.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't care what your racial background is, or none of, all across the board, there were people that did not participate in the census. And it was just like, whoa. And then, like, I've listened to so many different people recently. And again, it doesn't matter if you're so-called white or so-called black. But I listened to several people talk about not doing it, and it didn't matter what their appearance looked like. They still were talking about not participating in it.
But think about what we learned from the investigation just off of your area.
Yep.
It shows how the military can get that whole community annexed to it now.
Yes.
They're coming in and they're paying more than 50% of the town taxes.
Mm-hmm.
Then who has say so in the town then?
Who run it?
You get what I'm saying? I mean, it's just simple. Mm-hmm.
So serious, yeah.
If put yourself in that situation, if you doing something and you're putting in 50% or more than 50%, when you expect for you to have more say so than the party that's putting in less?
Absolutely.
I mean, it's the same thing when it comes to your local communities, your town, your cities, your state. You can only get out on what you put in.
Absolutely.
And so if you ain't putting nothing in completely whatsoever, what you think you're gonna get in return? I'll wait.
You know what I'm also thinking about? All them empty addresses on my street and the next street and the next street.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just saying. I was thinking about that last night, like, dang. Them empty addresses.
And the more empty addresses there become, just how the census gives representation for the population growth, it takes it away for the decline of too.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Then you wonder why they create a new group get created, then you get lumped in politically with this new group.
Mm-hmm.
They get your social political constructs right there and how they come about. It still boils down to participation.
Yeah, it does. It absolutely does boil down to participation. And let me just say this, add this. From a personal perspective, participating hasn't just meant knowing what's being passed or what's being, you know, being submitted or proposed with the city council or whatnot. It actually gives me an insight and a better understanding of the people. Every area has its identity, if that makes sense. You go to certain cities and you're like, oh, okay, this is the identity of this city, or this is the identity of this state, or whatever the case may be. And you actually see and get to interact with people and hear how they think, what they've seen change, what they're involved in, to keep things, the way that they are. And I don't mean like stagnant, I mean like preserve what we call old ways, or old school ways, because those things are very important. And I've learned that, just my personal perspective, that a lot of times what happens is one of the things I've noticed is that, I guess it would be my generation and younger, we have gotten a type of dismissive on old school ways and old ways, not realizing that the whole foundation to what we have going on now, it came from somewhere. It didn't just pop up. The structure, whether it's in politics, whether it's in community, whatever it is, it came from somewhere. There is a foundation to it. And when you completely go away from that, where's your foundation at? And that's just a personal perspective, just from listening and talking with people who are in different positions and different groups and organizations within this, actually in the whole county, but also are involved with other farmers in other counties. Um, it it's not just getting actively involved and knowing, okay, this is what's being passed and that's what's being presented. It's also the people, because again, the people make up all of it.
Correct.
I'm just saying, I love holes in the walls, or what I consider to be hole in the walls. And I found, and I was able to meet some really, really great people, who had little farms. They keep it simple, or little stores. But those stores, if you really think about it, if more people not necessarily knew about them, but contributed to those community stores, those farms, those businesses, those big businesses, not saying that there's necessarily anything wrong with them, so to speak. However, the flourishment of the community would grow because the community would be contributing to the community.
Uh-huh. I had today's link in the chat. We can get started whenever you're ready.
Oh,
This is
shoot.
going to get this is going to get very interesting.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. I know this link. Okay. So, what I would say is this: even though yesterday was Census Day, doesn't mean you can't do the census. Do the census. Do the census. You can still do the census. The deadline did not end.
No, it did not.
You can still do the census. Do the
Yeah,
census.
that's the official start day.
Correct. Do the census. Again, even aside from the envelope, aside from it being required by law, make yourself count. Yesterday was officially Census Day, It does not mean that census day ended yesterday. It means that you can participate and do the census again today and tomorrow and the next day and the next day. You can do it online. You can do it by mail. I'm just saying. You can even call in. I mean, do the census. Pretty please. Make yourself count so that you can count. Okay. Slavery. This is LDHI.
If you want, you can share your screen. I'll show it.
Okay, can you see?
Uh-huh.
Okay. African laborers for a new empire, Iberia, slavery, and the Atlantic world. Slavery in Iberia before the transatlantic trade. For the modern observer, one of the most striking aspects of slavery in late medieval and early modern Iberia is that it was not primarily associated with race or skin color. Religion and political loyalties were no less important than ethnicities and geographical origin in determining who could be enslaved. In addition to a significant number of sub-Saharan African slaves who came to Iberia via trans-Saharan and early Atlantic slaving networks, 15th and 16th century sources reveal the presence of enslaved Turks from Eastern Europe and the Ottoman Empire. North African Muslims, Moors, and Berberiscos represented another significant component of early modern Iberia's slave population, as did Moriscos in Spain or Moriscos in Portugal. The term referred to Iberians who had converted from Islam to Christianity, in many cases by force, and their descendants. That's a hot link. So Turks is a hot link. Let's see what took us to Wikipedia real quick. Turks. Turkish people of the Turks, also known as Anatolian Turks, are a Turkic ethnic group and nation living mainly in Turkey and speaking Turkish, the most widely spoken Turkic language. They are the largest ethnic group in Turkey, as well as by far the largest ethnic group among the Turkic people. Ethnic Turkish minorities exist in the former lands of the Ottoman Empire. In addition, a Turkish Am I still wait?
Yeah, you got to put it back up and reset it.
I just say, what did I do? Okay, can you see?
Uh-huh.
Okay, my bad. In addition, a Turkish diaspora has been established with modern migration, particularly in Western Europe. Turks arrived from Central Asia and Western China and settled in Anatolian Basin in around the 11th century through the conquest of Seljuk Turks, mixing with the peoples of Anatolia. The region then began to transform from a predominantly Greek Christian society into a Turkish Muslim one. Thereafter, the Ottoman Empire came to rule much of the Balkans, the Caucasus, the Middle East, excluding Iran, the North and North Africa over the course of several centuries with an advanced army and navy. The empire lasted until the end of the First World War when it was defeated by the Allies and partitioned. Following the successful Turkish War of Independence that ended with the Turkish national movement retaking most of the land lost to the Allies, the movement abolished the Ottoman Sultanate on November 1st, 1922, and proclaimed the Republic of Turkey on the 29th of October, 1923. Not all Ottomans were Muslims, and not all Ottoman Muslims were Turks, but by 1923, the majority of the people living within the borders of the new Turkish Republic identified as Turks. Article 66 of the Turkish Constitution defines a Turk as anyone who is bound to the Turkish state through the bond of citizenship. Therefore, the legal use of the term Turkish as it pertains to a citizen of Turkey is different from the term's ethnic definition. However, the majority of the Turkish population, as estimated 70 to 75%, is of Turkish ethnicity. The vast majority of the Turks are Muslim. Let's go back real quick. Let's click on Moors real quick. This you, double cousin?
Yeah, don't mess with me today. I ain't come here to work.
Okay, we live.
Oh, I know that.
Okay.
See what time it is. You know, Bones go live at 8:01 in 30 seconds.
You know?
Don't Bones me now.
Ain't nobody do that.
People like, ain't no seller. I got a question. 10, 9, 8. I'm like, we gonna lie? You just said you had a question. Thought we had time.
Ask that question real quick.
Had a baby eats a boy. That's what you gotta do, Bones. You got something to say?
Like the guy off the Micro Mini.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hot Wheels, the Micro Machines. Grand Rising, everybody. Peace to the chat. Peace to the chat. Peace to the chat. Chats.
So more people, more in English usage, a Moroccan or formerly a member of the Muslim population of what is now Spain and Portugal, of mixed Arab, Spanish, and Amazi Berber origins. The Moors created the Arab Andalusian civilization and subsequently settled as refugees in North Africa between the 11th and the 17th centuries. Bless you. By extension, corresponding to the Spanish Mora, the term occasionally denotes any Muslim in general, as in the case of the Moors of Sri Lanka or of the Philippines.
Message.
And let's click on Berbers real quick.
Just giving everybody a quick history on, all the parties that be real quick.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's awesome. It's really important to know the history behind what you're reading, because what you think you know now may be different from what was then and what is still now. But okay. Berber. Berber, self-name Amazi, plural Imazan. Oh, I'm messing this up, Bones, help me. Any of the descendants of the pre-Arab inhabitants of North Africa. The Berbers live in scattered communities across Morocco, Algeria, Tanzania, Libya, Egypt, Mali, Niger, and Mauritania. They speak various Amazi languages belonging to the Afro-Asiatic family related to the ancient Egyptians.
Noted.
And last hot link is Moriscos. Well, last hot link in this paragraph. Moriscos. Morisco, Spanish, meaning little more. One of the Spanish Muslims or their descendants who became baptized Christians. During the Christian reconquest of Muslim Spain, surrendering Muslim Madhur communities in Aragon, 1118, Valencia, 1238, and Granada, 1492. In Granada, 1492, were usually guaranteed freedom of religion by treaty. This tolerant policy was abandoned in the late 15th century when Christian authorities began to make conversions and ordered the destruction of Islamic theological books. The Muslims of Granada rebelled. In 1502, offered the choice of baptism or exile. Many of them were baptized and continued to practice Islam secretly. In 1526, the Muslims of Valencia and Aragon were similarly forced to convert. Thereafter, Islam was officially prohibited in Spain. Let's go back. All right. Morisco's drawing from Trechtenbuch by Christoph Wieditz, 1530 to 1540, courtesy of the Germanisches National Museum. Wieditz was a German painter who documented European peasant customs. By the late 15th century, Iberia's enslaved population also included small numbers of Guanches, sized in the Canary Islands. Amerindians from the Caribbean and Brazil, and even Indians from Goa, who are considered 16th and 17th century North African and Ottoman corsairs, frequently captured Spanish, Portuguese, and Italian ships and either held the passengers for ransom or sold them into North African and Turkish slave markets. The fear of being enslaved by Muslims was a regular part of the daily life for Southern European seafarers and coastal inhabitants, and this concern is addressed extensively in early modern Iberia texts and literature. So, clicking on these hot links, Guanches, let's see what it says. The Guanches of the Canary Islands. Off the coast of West Africa lie the Canary Islands. This region became home to a mysterious group in antiquity who became known as the Guanches. While it is unknown for sure how they arrived on the islands, what is known is that they shared a number of cultural characteristics with the ancient Egyptians, and that their building style appears to have been replicated in South and Central America. Like the Celtic Tocharians, the finest evidence of what the original Gauche look like is in fortuitous existence of the original Gauche mummies, which are on public display in which are in public display in that island's Group National Museum. The corpses on display are estimated to be between 600 and 1,000 years old. An examination of one of the mummy's bodies showed incisions that virtually matched those found in Egyptian mummies, although the string used by the Gauche embalmers to close the wounds was much coarser than would have been used by the Egyptian experts. The Gauches also possessed the art of writing, although this has not yet been the subject of any major study. The Gauche pyramids on the Canary Islands. However, the most stunning link between the Gauches and the Egyptians comes in the form of pyramids. The Gauches built several small step pyramids on the island using the same model as those found in ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia. The pyramids have an east-west alignment, which also indicates that they probably had a religious purpose associated with the rise and setting of the sun. Carefully built stairways on the west side of each pyramid led up to the summit, which in each case has a flat platform covered with gravel, possibly used for religious and ceremonial purposes. Okay, my bad. Going back. All right.
No problem. Just quick history on Canary Islands.
Yeah. And again, it is really helpful to have an understanding. I mean, for me, clicking on the hot links. So reading that by the late 15th century, Iberia's enslaved population also included small numbers of Ganchas size in the Canary Islands. It also gives me a better insight that the Ganchas that they enslaved along with the Iberians, it changed. Like there are a group of people who were lumped in as Iberian who weren't originally Iberian.
Mm-hmm. You see, they got Amerindians from the Caribbean and Brazil.
Correct. So now clicking on this next hot link, Indians from Goa.
Let's find out who Indians from Goa.
Oh, okay. This is okay. New European Empire, 16th century. Since the fall of Rome, there has been no empire based in Europe which extends outside the continent. This situation changes abruptly in the 16th century when Spain and Portugal became the pioneers in a new era of colonization. The Iberian Peninsula is well poised at the time for this leap into the unknown. In their great voyages of discovery in the 15th century, the Portuguese have developed ocean-going skills which were eagerly copied by their Spanish neighbors. Spain's internal conflicts of recent centuries have recently been resolved with the union of Castile and Aragon, and then in 1492, the conquest of Granada. It was Aragon who they married?
Aragon, that's one of the kingdoms. That's how the marriage joined the kingdoms together, forming Spain. But you remember, all this officially didn't take place till after 1492.
Right.
And the conquest didn't happen till 1492. It was 15 something once it became official.
Right. And it's just crazy because it's just hitting me that it was the Aragon. Okay. I'm picking up what you
That's still in Aragon, yeah, the two kingdoms.
Yeah. Okay. So 2 voyages in the 1490s lay the foundation for the future empires. Columbus, sailing west for Spain, stumbles upon America in 1492. Vasco da Gama, adventuring south and east for Portugal, reaches India in 1498. Portugal's Eastern trade, 1508 to 1595. The profitable trade in Eastern spices is cornered by the Portuguese in the 16th century to the detriment of Venice, which has previously had a virtual monopoly of these valuable commodities, until now brought overland through the India and Arabia, and then across the Mediterranean by the Venetians for distribution in Western Europe. By establishing the sea route and around the Cape, Portugal can undercut the Venetian trade with its profusion of middlemen. The new route is firmly secured for Portugal by the activities of Afonso de Albuquerque. Wow, okay. Who takes up his duties as the Portuguese viceroy of India in 1508. The early explorers up the East Africa coast have left Portugal with bases in Mozambique and Zanzibar. Albuquerque extends the secure route eastwards by capturing and fortifying Hormuz at the mouth of the Persian Gulf in 1514. Goa on the west coast of India in 1510, where he massacres the entire Muslim population for the effrontery of resisting him, and Malacca guarding the northwest channel of the route east in 1511. The island of Bombay is ceded to the Portuguese in 1534. An early Portuguese presence in Sri Lanka is steadily increased during the century, and in 1557, Portuguese merchants established a colony on the island of Macau. Goa functions from the start as the capital of Portuguese India. So I'm gonna go back on that one.
Yeah, just some brief history. We ain't have to go deep into it.
Yeah. I just didn't want to read like right at it and then
Yeah.
All right. So when we're seeing here where it says seized in the Canary Islands, Amerindians from the Caribbean and Brazil, and even Indians from Goa, obviously there was a conflict, and obviously there was a massacre. Obviously there was a war, there was a fight, who originated in the Indian subcontinent. Just saying. So just the background to this background. Next hot link is Corsairs. North African and Ottoman Corsairs frequently captured Spanish, Portuguese, and Italian ships and either held the passengers for ransom or sold them into North African and Turkish slave markets. So Corsairs, this hot link.
You going to prom? What do you need a corsage for? They ain't got no school. What do they need a corsage for?
Corsairs.
Basically, Barbary pirates. Yeah, you don't have to read into it. Just note that they're Barbary pirates.
Okay, my bad.
No problem.
Okay, North African and Turkish slave markets. Let's see what this looks like real quick, and then I'll go back.
It's just Barbary slave trade.
Yeah. All right. Sub-Saharan Africans appeared among the Iberian slave population, most notably after the commencement of the Portuguese transatlantic slave trade. Okay, Sub-Saharan Africans appeared among Iberian slave populations, most notably after the commencement of the Portuguese transatlantic slave trade from Africa beginning in the 1440s. By the mid 16th century, sub-Saharan Africans appear to have already become the dominant slave population throughout the peninsula. Though it is not entirely clear when they began to outnumber other enslaved groups. While some Muslim, Morisco, and North African slaves described as black by their Iberian contemporaries, many were not. For example, it is not uncommon to find reference to white Morisco and Morisca slaves in Iberia well into the 17th century and beyond. Racialization may have existed in Iberia prior to the colonization of the Spanish Americas and Brazil, and it is possible that Iberians had been influenced by some North Africans' attitudes towards their darker-skinned sub-Saharan neighbors. But in the minds of early modern Iberians, slavery was not directly linked to blackness.
Oh, it weren't?
Nope, it wasn't. It wasn't.
Yeah, it seemed like these first so-called North African slaves, a lot of them are all Iberians.
Right. Okay, this says former slave market built in 1444. Image by Hamani Vigas Logas, Portugal, 2013.
Yeah, but you have to remember, this slave market that they're talking about is the Iberian slave market
Correct.
that existed way before a so-called transatlantic slave.
Correct.
That's where these markets come from.
The fact that it says, though it is not entirely clear when they began to outnumber other enslaved groups. Okay.
Because how would you know? Think about it.
Right.
If you're mixing in Iberians, different Europeans, remember they were enslaving everybody.
Yeah.
Well, it'll go into more detail as we read more.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. By the time Portuguese merchants and mariners launched the transatlantic slave trade from Africa to Europe in the mid 15th century, Iberian and
Hold up. The slave trade went from where to where?
It says the slave trade went from Africa to Europe.
Place lines.
This is in 15th century. So 15th century would be 1600s. Well, okay,
No,
15th century.
It's 14.
14.
Yeah.
It's 14.
So in the 1400s,
Okay, there you go. Yeah, my
the
bad.
slave trade is from Africa to Europe.
Right.
Message.
But in all actuality, when it says from Africa to Europe, we can't be thinking Africa what we know now.
Well,
No,
was Africa in 14?
we talking about North Africa, or
Right.
Tanzania, Iberian, Berbers, Arabs.
Right.
Oh, we got the ancient names then.
Because
at this
when a
time,
lot of us think of Africa, we think of the whole. Go ahead.
Yeah, remember, they're just on the coast of Africa setting up ports and stuff.
Correct.
Exporting from the coast of Africa back up to Europe.
So, Gabrielle,
Correct.
remember, we can't talk about the interior of Africa at that time. Oh, nobody in
Right.
the interior of Africa at that time.
Because
Slave
even
trading.
at that time, there was a spot that was marked on maps that said unknown. They don't know nothing about it. Nothing.
This is hilarious. Bob, did you say hilarious or Miller? No, he said hilarious. We can't go over there.
I had to go on mute. Yeah, just your head.
Don't do
bad.
that. That's 5 to 10 minutes, and you did.
Bad. Your head bad. I gotta read from the beginning. I don't even know where I stopped at. Did I hit a period? Okay. By the time Portuguese merchants and mariners launched the transatlantic slave trade from Africa to Europe in the mid 15th century, so we're talking about the mid 1400s, Iberian and Mediterranean precedents already dictated who could be enslaved and how. What?
That's what it said.
Okay, I didn't catch that one. Okay. Okay, and how? And under what circumstances enslaved persons might regain their liberty. While cross-culture interactions between Iberian Christians and their Muslim neighbors was not always agnostic, the practice of capturing...
Got me saying it wrong.
My bad. Antagonistic, my bad. Thank you for that. The practice of capturing and ransoming prisoners across religious and political boundaries was both ancient and widespread. Throughout the early modern era, Muslim and Christian captives could be found on either side of the Mediterranean. For both religious groups, a slave could obtain freedom through a long-established custom in which family members, religious orders, or political authorities paid a ransom. In this context, it was broadly understood that slavery was often the result of misfortune, i.e. shipwreck, captured at sea, abducting during a coastal radar razzia, and ideally a condition to be endured only temporarily. By the close of the 16th century, which would be 1500s, the end of the 1500s, if not sooner, long distance slave trafficking had begun to definitely replace coastal raids, capture during battle, or the mass enslavement of newly subjugated religious minorities as the primary means of procuring slaves to supplement Iberian labor forces. But long after the disappearance of religious frontiers within Iberia and far away from the Mediterranean world, slave sale contracts drawn up in the Iberian colonies continued to use formal language referring to enslaved people as captives who had been acquired in a just war.
Who colonies again?
Iberian colonies.
Message.
I need to click on what's a just war. The just war theory is largely Christian philosophy that attempts to reconcile three things. Taking human life is seriously wrong. States have a duty to defend their citizens and defend justice. Protecting innocent human life and defending important moral values sometimes requires willingness to use force and violence. All right. I got a epiphany okay, I'm going back. The legal and spiritual personhood formerly accorded to slaves was another significant aspect of slavery in the Iberian Peninsula that had major ramifications for the institution's subsequent development in Iberian colonies. Even though enslaved people in Iberian overseas colonies stood little chance of ever being ransomed, In legal terms, slaves were viewed as captives or prisoners rather than as personal property. Unlike the chattel slavery system that later developed in English American colonies, slavery in the early modern Iberian world was still considered a temporary condition, and enslaved people could obtain some protection or recourse from institutions such as the church and the crown. Iberian policies regarding slavery, among other topics, were codified in the 13th century. That means the 12th and 1200s in a series.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in a series. Hold on. Wait, nope, let me finish. In a series of legal and religious arguments known as the Siete Paradas rationales that were themselves based in part on Roman laws dating back even earlier. Historians continue to debate whether aspect of these Iberian slave codes that survived down to the 19th century produced meaningful benefits for enslaved people in Cuba and Brazil.
Uh-huh. If it's Iberian slave clothes that's being used against people in Cuba and Brazil in the 18th century, well, no, in the 19th century, that's the 1800s.
That is correct. Okay, Iberian slave codes that survived down to the 19th century, which is 1800s, produced meaningful benefits for enslaved people in Cuba and Brazil. So these Iberian slave codes produced meaningful benefits to enslaved people in Cuba and Brazil. So the enslaved people, the Iberians that were enslaved in Cuba and Brazil, as opposed to the experience of their counterparts in the antebellum United States. Whoa. Still, pre-existing slave codes did not play the same influential role in the development of slavery in Northern European colonies, which may explain some of the early differences between coerced labor systems in different European colonies and later nations.
Remember this, the Iberians of Andalus, they don't leave. They just go under the name now of Spanish.
Correct. Um, People need to rethink what they're calling themselves right now. Because what you call yourself now or define yourself now pertains to history or history's people. Okay, this says Las Siete Partidas, the 7-part code, 1550 publication cover, originally compiled in 1265. The medieval legal code written in the Castilian vernacular was compiled under the supervision of Alfonso X's 10,
Uh-huh.
the Wise, 1252 to 1284 of Castile. The laws went into effect in 1348 and they spread to all of Spain and later to Spanish colonies in the Americas.
Basically, they created a religious argument to enslave people.
I ain't going there right now. because I think I know I read. Okay. So that's the end of this link. So the justification. Oh,
No, it goes deeper. Yeah, you just press launching the Portuguese. Yeah, it goes taking you further and further. Yeah, we ain't even, we just warming up.
man. Don't take my word for it. Read a link. Launching the Portuguese slave trade in Africa. Finding a new. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, handsome. I'm sorry, handsome.
No, it was just giving you a history of who these same Portuguese and Spanish that you call today. It's letting you know who they are.
Right.
They're Iberians.
Exactly. Finding a new trade route. Until the late medieval era, Southern Europe constituted an import market for the North African merchants who brought gold and other commodities and small number of slaves in caravans across the Sahara Desert. But during the early 15th century, which is the 1400s, the beginning of the 1400s, advances in nautical technology, especially the invention of the caravel with its aerodynamic hull and triangular latine sails, enabled Portuguese mariners to travel south along Africa's Atlantic coast in search of a direct maritime route to gold-producing regions in sub-Saharan West Africa. Founded in 1482 near the town of Elmina in present-day Ghana, the Fiatori So Jorge da Mina was of special importance in that it gave the Portuguese far better access to the sources of West Africa gold.
Remember, they didn't get to this part till 1482 on the coast.
Hold on, let me look at this map. Is it going? No, it won't get bigger. Maybe. No, it won't get bigger. Okay.
Oh, you looking at them years, huh?
Uh-huh.
You notice you see no years and no ships coming to North America bringing nobody from that continent.
I'm not. Up here, what is this? 14. That says 1498. That says
Yeah, that's
1495.
Newfoundland and Labrador. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't. Yeah, I don't. Okay, let me get off here. Okay. This says this is a map of Portuguese discoveries, explorations, contacts, and conquests from 1336 to 1543. Created.
They was way on the other side because there was no place near North America.
Correct.
It was way over in the Pacific.
Yeah. Arrival dates noted with location, main sea routes to the Indian Ocean in blue, and territories claimed under King John III of Portugal from 1521 to 1557 in green. Now, here's
what the story says. Remember what the story, what they tried to tell us? The Portuguese supposed to be responsible for starting the Atlantic slave trade.
Yeah.
But where it shows from that time to the 1500s when all that was supposed to kick off, They wasn't in North America. Still.
Now, what I find very interesting is that over here, okay, on the right, it's in green, right? But over here is when they're talking about, we had read where they're talking about this is where they came in 1521. But in green, it's showing in 1521.
But not the Portuguese.
Right.
But this is the Portuguese. The Spanish was on the other side of South America.
Right.
That's in 1521. See, I said that because remember, the story states that the Portuguese started the slave trade.
Correct.
But in their own records and their own shipping logs, they say otherwise.
This is absolutely correct. Huh. Them maps and them timelines. Portuguese mariners sailed beyond Cape Bajado, Morocco, for the first time in the 1430s. By 1445, a trading post was established on the small island of Argum of the coast of present-day Mauritania. As Portuguese ships continued to explore African coastlines and rivers over the following decades, they established similar fechoturas or trading factories with the goal of tapping into pre-existing local commercial networks.
So they wasn't conquering, they was tapping in pre-existing.
Right.
So that means people were already, in these parts where they were going in Africa, they were already doing these things.
Right. Portuguese traders procured not only captives for export, but also various West African commodities such as ivory, peppers, textiles, wax, grain, and copper. This is a map of Santiago, Cape Verde, 1589, created by Giovanni Battista Bozia. Santiago was the first of the Cape Verde Islands to be settled by the Portuguese in the 1460s. The slave trade out of West Africa eventually made Cidade Velha in Santiago one of the wealthiest cities in the Portuguese Empire.
Still bring Nan ship to North America with Nan African on it.
Correct. Yeah, you're absolutely correct. In addition to trading posts, Portugal established colonies on previously uninhabited Atlantic African islands that would later serve as collection points for captives and commodities to be shipped to Iberia and eventually to the Americas.
Oh, okay, all right. No, keep going. Never mind.
Portuguese colonization of the Cape Verde Islands. Hold on. We read about the Cape Verde Islands. Didn't we read that the Cape Verde Islands consisted of the Turks? Okay.
Which you know is Iberians.
Correct. Okay, just checking. Okay. You know, sometimes I got to check my memory. Some 350 miles west of the upper Guyane mainland was underway by the 1460s. Further south in the Gulf of Guinea. Okay, my bad. Thank you. Guinea. Portuguese mariners encountered the island of São Tomé and Principe around 1470. Colonization of São Tomé began in the 1490s. Both groups of islands served as entrepots for Portuguese commerce across vast regions of West Africa. Though São Tomé became an important sugar producer, the island also collected slaves from transshipment to Alima, many of whom would be sold to local merchants and used to transport gold from the interior.
Still, ain't shipped nobody here.
Correct.
And when they saying Americas, they are talking about South America, to the to South America, to the Portuguese colonies there.
Despite Portugal's success in using maritime routes to finally bypass trans-Saharan overland trade routes controlled by Muslim intermediaries, Portuguese activity in Western Africa was soon overshadowed by much more lucrative commerce in India. In 1453, the Ottoman Empire's successful capture of Constantinople, Istanbul, formerly Western Europe's main source for spices, silks, and other luxury goods produced in the Middle East and Asia, added further motivation for European overseas expansion. After several decades of Portuguese expedition venturing southwards along Western Africa's coastline, Portuguese navigator Bartolomeu Dias famously sailed around the Cape of Good Hope in 1488, opening up European access to the Indian Ocean. By the close of the 15th century, which is 1400s, the end of the 1400s, Portuguese merchants were able to circumvent Islamic commercial, political, and military strongholds in both North Africa and in Eastern Mediterranean. One significant outcome of Portuguese overseas expansion during this period was a dramatic increase in Iberian access to the sub-Saharan trade networks. So they didn't create nothing. They just took over what was already established.
Not really even took over. Some of them they took over, and some, like they said, they just got access to the trade routes.
Correct. But those trade routes were already there, so they just joined in on it.
Exactly.
Now, this is just me, okay? This is just me. So,
is that a new addition? You got Karen, Sharon, Tiffany, and me. Is that the Asian persuasion? Is that what that means? Me. Oh, I'm here. I'm waiting for me. Where's that double cousin?
Well, I'm just saying, I see Bartolomeu Dias, and I'm just looking at this, and Bartolomeu Dias, emphasis on Dias, is Portuguese.
Correct.
Just kind of putting that out there. That's all.
Oh, you thought he was Spanish?
Well, technically, yes, because Aragon and Castile married and made Spanish.
Yeah, but what were the people still? Iberian.
Jinx, you owe me a candy bar. Okay, I thought it was funny. My bad.
Hold on, is that the payment for Jinxes? Find me a vegan candy bar. Without the wrapper, you can get to it. You can get to it quick. Taste it. No, I'm joking.
But
Yeah.
Be honest. Did you hide my
Mike Taste.
that way?
Mike Jack.
1 2 1 2.
Oh, okay. I'm just
My
saying.
bad.
At least 3 months.
My bad. We're having the mysterious search for some missing Crocs. I apologize. My bad. And I'm getting blamed for it. Like I'm trying to hold the Crocs hostage so my daughter can go back to college.
Okay, that's the reason she can't go back.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
She's gonna have to start reading some passages.
I know.
She really needs some learning in her life.
Yeah. Pope Nicholas V and the Portuguese slave trade. With Portugal's expansion into Western Africa in the 15th century, which is the 1400s, Iberian merchants began to recognize the economic potential of a large-scale slave trafficking enterprise. One of the first to record this sentiment, according to Portuguese royal chronicler Gomes Anés de Zorora, was a young ship captain named Anton Goncalves, who sailed to West Africa in 1441, hoping to acquire seal skins and oil. After obtaining his cargo, Goncalves called a meeting of the 21 sailors who accompanied him and unveiled his plans to increase their profits. According to Zorora, Goncalves told his crew, "We have already got our cargo, but how fair a thing would it be if we, who have come to this land for a cargo of such petty merchandise, were to meet with good fortune and bring the first captives before the presence of our prince." That night, Goncalves led a raiding party into Cap Blanc, a narrow peninsula between Western Sahara and Mauritania, and kidnapped 2 Berbers, 1 man and 1 woman. Another Portuguese mariner, Nuno Tristillo, and members of his crew soon joined Goncalves. Although the raid resulted in less than a dozen captives, Zorora imagines in his accounts that Prince Henry of Portugal responded to his enterprise with joy, not so much for the number of captives taken, but for the prospect of other countless captives that would be taken. And this is in the 1400s? 1441 to be exact.
Mm-hmm.
This is still Portugal and Africa, right?
Uh-huh.
Okay. While Goncalves' voyage in 1441 is widely considered to mark the beginning of the transatlantic slave trade, it may also be viewed as an extension of an older tradition of raiding and ransom on both shores of the Mediterranean. Upon returning to Portugal, Goncalves treated his captives in accordance with this custom, and allowed them to negotiate the terms of their release. Rather than offering a ransom of money, the captives promised to give Goncalves 10 slaves in exchange for their own freedom, and safe passage home. According to royal chronicler Zorora, the Berbers explained that these new captives would be black and not the lineage of Moors, but Gentiles. Thus, in 1442, Goncalves returned his Berber captives to Western Sahara, receiving as payment 10 enslaved sub-Saharan Africans, whom he transported back to Portugal for resale. You know what?
You notice you have Berbers in the Western Sahara.
Right. Not just that, in particular, the negotiation that they came to in their release versus they said that these new captives would be black, not the lineage of Moors. So did they give back to the Portuguese their own people? Okay, let me
see, because that's, remember what was going on. That normally that you would pay money.
Right.
People back. But in this case, instead of paying money, they told them, listen, we don't have money to give you, but we can give you 10 people that can come work for you.
Right. But the fact that they said that they would not, what they gave is they would not be the lineage of Moors. So it has to, okay.
It's not that it has to be. They was basically letting them know, listen, we're not going to give you no more Berbers. We won't give you no more Berbers.
We're not going to give you our people.
Yeah, we're not going to give you our people, but we're going to give you 10 people.
Right.
Remember, Moor at this time is just a derogatory term for the Berbers.
Correct. Gotcha. 15th century, which is 1400s, Iberian legal traditions regulated Christians' treatment of Jews, Muslim, and other Christians, clearly delineating, for example, who was enslavable and who was not. In contrast, the juridical I can't say that word right. Status of people, huh? Judicial. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Oh.
That's what happens when you read all them big foreign words for too long.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Thank you, Bones. I have seen the errors of my ways. Oh my goodness. Okay, the judicial status of people who did not fit these categories was more ambiguous. Legal and philosophical arguments to address this issue began to evolve during the second half of the 15th century, which is the second half of the 1400s. Once Portuguese mariners began to return to Iberia with captives acquired in West Africa and West Central Africa, notably, the treatment of Black Gentiles was addressed in 1452 and in 1455, when Pope Nicholas V issued a series of papal bulls that granted Portugal the right to enslave sub-Saharan Africans. Church leaders argued that slavery served as a neutral deterrent and Christianizing influence to barbarous behavior among pagans. Using this logic, the Pope issued a mandate to the Portuguese king Alfonso V and instructed him to invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens and pagans whatsoever, and to reduce their persons to perpetual slavery, and to apply and appropriate to himself and his successors the kingdoms, dukedoms, counties, principalities, dominions, possessions, and goods, and to convert them to his and their use and profits. Okay. Excerpt in Latin. Those that could take time. I'm not about to do that.
Yeah, they got the English translation right.
I'm about to say I'm going to the English translation. I'm just all I'm saying. We therefore weighing all and singular the premises with due meditation, and nothing that since we had formerly by other letters of ours granted among other things free and ample faculty to the aforesaid King Alfonso to invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens and pagans whatsoever, and other enemies of Christ whatsoever placed, and the kingdoms, dukedoms, principalities, dominions, possessions, and all movable and immovable goods whatsoever held and possessed by them, and to reduce their persons to perpetual slavery. Translation from Davenport Francis Gardiner. Don't know what ED is. European treaties bearing on the history of the United States and its dependency to 1648. Carnegie Institute of Washington, Washington, D.C., 1917. That's interesting.
But you get to see what the treaty actually said.
Yeah. Yeah. Though the papal bull mentions invading and vanquishing African peoples, no European nation was willing or able to put an army in West Africa until the Portuguese colonization of Angola more than a century later. A century is 100 years?
Yep.
Okay, so more than 100 years later, and even then, Portuguese forces received extensive aid from armies of Mbangala or Jaga or Haga mercenaries. Early raids, such as the one made by Goncalves and Tristo in 1441, were unusual and may have only been possible because the Portuguese had never previously raided south of Cape Barreiro. Portuguese mariners soon learned that inhabitants...
Hold on. So raiding and snatching up slaves from out of these areas was
hard.
Unusual. Not unusual.
Who you breaking up on?
Right? I just want to make sure it said unusual. That's it.
Say it one more time.
Just making sure it said unusual.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Portuguese mariners soon learned that inhabitants along the upper Guinea coast were more than capable of defending themselves from such incursions. Not long after his 1441 voyage, Tristo and most of his crew were killed off the coast of present-day Senegal.
So never mind. We can continue. We're going to have a conversation after this.
No, I like your questions. Your questions make me think. Ask me a question so I can think.
So if you can't snatch nobody, and the Portuguese, who people try to tell you are the ones who were snatching people by the boatloads, ain't doing it, we got a problem.
Like Florida?
Very interesting, and there's more.
Prior to the colonization of Angola, Portuguese colonies and commercial hubs in Africa were generally established on islands that had previously been uninhabited. Meanwhile, Freitores on the mainland Vitorias on the mainland depended largely on maintaining good relations with local populations. Thus, in addition to justifying the enslavement of Muslims and other non-Christian peoples, including an increasingly important population of sub-Saharan Africans and their descendants, within the Iberian world, this legislation essentially authorized Portuguese colonists and merchants overseas to acquire enslaved Africans through commerce, drawing on pre-existing markets and trade routes. As the 1455 bull indicates, at first the church officially limited African slave trading to Alfonso of Portugal. Regardless, other European groups soon followed. During the late 15th and 16th century, which is the late 14 and 1500s, French and English mariners occasionally attempted to raid or trade with Portuguese settlements and autonomous African communities. During the War of the Castilian Succession, which is 1475 to 1479, the Spanish faction supporting Isabel, future Queen Isabel of Castile, directly challenged Portuguese claim in Western Africa, sending large fleets to raid the Cape Verde Islands and conduct trade near Elmina. Despite Castile's formal recognition of Portuguese interest in Western Africa, stipulated in the treaties of Alcacovas, 1479, and Tordesillas in 1494, voyages organized in Andalusia, and the Canary Islands continued to visit African ports. So hold on.
This is when Spain and Portugal split the world in two.
Yeah.
For their purposes of trading.
Right. The Papal Bull of 1455 justified the expansion of Black African slavery within early Iberian colonies and the acquisition of more African captives and territories. But the same decree also provided a legal framework for sub-Saharan Africans to negotiate with Iberian authorities on equal footing and to make claims of their own should they convert to Christianity.
Say what?
I need to read that again because there are like 6 things. Just click. Okay. The Papal Bull of 1455 justified the expansion of Black African slavery within early Iberian colonies and the acquisition of more African captives and territory. But the same decree also provided a legal framework for sub-Saharan Africans to negotiate the Iberian authorities on equal footing and to make claims of their own should they convert to Christianity. Perhaps the best known example of this form of negotiations is found in the Kingdom of Congo and West Central Africa during the late 15th and early 16th century, which is the late 1400s and early 1500s. Congolese political elites adopted Christianity and sent emissaries to Europe. In the 1520s, Congo Christian ruler used diplomatic pressure based on his religious status to try to limit the Portuguese slave trade from Congo.
Getting interesting.
Yeah, people don't even. the Spanish and New World slavery. Just as, give me a second, my bad, hold on. Just a second.
No problemo.
Peace to the chat.
Yeah, I think we're gonna finish this one out today. Well, only what 3 more chapters.
Knock it out the box.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
My bad.
No problem whatsoever.
Again, I got my youngest one up here packing up and getting stuff together. I don't know how her stuff gonna fit well. It is what it is. Okay. Just as Castilian concessions in 1479 helped put Isabel on the throne of Castile. Wait. Just as Castilian concessions in 1479 helped put Isabel on the throne of Castile, similar recognition of Portuguese claims in Africa in 1494 helped to secure Spanish interests in the Americas. As a result, it was Spain rather than Portugal that first made extensive use of enslaved Africans as a colonial labor force in the Americas.
Dun dun dun.
Okay, so now here's the thing. And I'm gonna keep reading. I'm gonna keep reading for sure. But in this first little paragraph, first sentence, we're in 1479 to 1494. That timeline from 1479 to 1494, doesn't that surpass 1492?
Yes, it do. But all that'll be clarified as we continue reading as well.
All right. Amerindian slavery and coerced labor. Soon after his famous 1492 voyage, with the backing of the Spanish crown and over 1,000 Spanish colonists. Okay, so let me just say this and tell me if I'm remembering this right, because I have to constantly tell myself. We're saying Spanish, but what I'm actually reading is Aragon.
Aragon and Castile.
Got you. I have to constantly keep telling myself that so I don't. Okay, Aragon, Castile. Okay. Soon after his famous 1492 voyage, with the backing of the Spanish crown and over 1,000 Spanish colonists, Genoese merchant Christopher Columbus established the first European colony in the Americas on the island of Hispaniola, present-day Haiti and the Dominican Republic. What?
There's more.
No, help me right now. I'm having a moment, and I need you to help me to clarify some things.
What's your question?
So the credit that is being given to Christopher Columbus in 1492 for discovering the Americas is an island?
Yes, remember, Christopher Columbus never came to North America.
This is correct.
He never made land.
So the technicality on it is an island that they're using?
You can say,
Hold on, you're breaking up.
I said you can say that.
Got you. Okay. Columbus is believed to had to have had prior experience trading in West Africa and had certainly visited the Canary Islands, where indigenous people known as Ganches had long been enslaved and exported in small numbers back to Spain. Now, if I'm remembering correct, the Ganches are the ones that they referred to in the article clicked on, hot link earlier, that build the pyramids and were closely related to Egyptians, but more specifically were in reminiscent of South Americans. Is that correct? Am I remembering that right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I got to do this recap thing because, I got to make sure I'm placing things in my mind the way they need to be. All right. So, reading this from, okay. Columbus is believed to have had prior experience in trading in West Africa and had certainly visited the Canary Islands, where indigenous people known as Ganches had long been enslaved and exported in small numbers back to Spain. Though Columbus was primarily interested in finding gold, he also recognized Caribbean Islanders' potential value as slaves. In early 1495, preparing to return to Spain, he loaded his ship with 500 enslaved Tainos from Hispaniola. Let me click on hot link Tainos real quick, just for.
Please do, cause I want to learn something.
Just if you don't mind, please. Taino, Arawakan speaking people who at the time of Christopher Columbus' exploration inhabited what are now Cuba, Jamaica, Hispaniola, Haiti, and the Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm asking, so you're saying that those are the people today, but those are their
the original,
those are the ancestors of the people that are there today.
Some of the people,
Some of the people. No, I got it. Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah, because Arawakan is the language, Taino is the people.
Right. An alternative title is Antillean Arawak.
Yeah, because a lot of your Antillians are descendants of them, especially the ones that's in the remote areas of the Antilles.
Gotcha. One of the most numerous indigenous people of the Caribbean, the Taino, may have numbered 1 or 2 million at the time of the Spanish conquest in the late 15th century, which is the late 1400s. They had long been on the defensive against the aggressive Carib people who had conquered the Lesser Antilles to the east. Can I click on Carib real quick?
Go ahead.
You can click whatever you like.
Carib, American Indian people who inhabit the Lesser Antilles and parts of the neighboring South American coast at the time of the Spanish conquest. Their name was given to the Caribbean Sea, and its Arawakan equivalent is the origin of the English word cannibal. Today the term Caribbean is used to designate a linguistic group that includes not only the language of the Antillean Carib, but also many related Indian language spoken in South America. The island Carib, who were warlike and allegedly cannibalistic, let's throw in allegedly, were immigrants from the mainland who, after driving the Arawak from the Lesser Antilles, were expanding. 100.
How you know they were immigrants? Because remember, they got kicked out of South America.
Right.
Sent there. These are what your Toltecas.
Yep. Thank you for that click. Appreciate you. Okay. Taína Hispaniola. Only 300 would survive the voyage. Okay, so they took 500 enslaved Taínos from Hispaniola. Only 300 would survive the voyage. Columbus' slaving exploits, often viewed as an attempt to compensate for the gold that was not forthcoming, were quickly cut short by the Spanish monarchs. Fernando II of Aragon and Isabel I of Castile, nevertheless, coerced Amerindians. Labor grew increasingly important within the Spanish royal policies regarding Amerindians were in many ways contradictory. The Spanish crown intended to protect Amerindians from abuse, but at the same time expected them to accept Spanish rule, embrace Catholicism, and conform to a work regimen designed to render Spain's overseas colonies profitable. Thus, in 1501, for example, the monarchs ordered Hispaniola's governor to return all property stolen from Taínos and to pay them wages for their labor. Further reforms were outlined in the laws of Burgos 1512, and later in the laws of Granada 1526, though both appear to have been largely ignored by Spanish colonists.
Bum, bum, bum.
Okay, this is supposed to be, this is a picture of Columbus landing on Hispaniola on December 6, 1492, greeted by Arawaks, engraving by Theodore de Bray, circuit 1594, courtesy of the Library of Congress. Okay. Meanwhile, Spain's monarch broadly granted colonists dominion over Amerindian subjects, compelling native populations to pay tribute, often in the form of labor. The later practice was largely an extension of the medieval encomienda, a quasi-feudal system in which Iberian Christians who had performed valuable military service were granted authority to govern people and resources in lands conquered by Iberian Muslims. Also, despite their objection to a transatlantic slave trade of Amerindians, the crown permitted their outright enslavement and sale within the Americas. During the first half of the 16th century, which is the first half of the 1500s, Spanish colonists conducted raids throughout the Caribbean, bringing captives from Central America, Northern South America, and Florida back to Hispaniola and other Spanish settlements. Two of the principal arguments used to justify the enslavement of Amerindians were the concept of just war, i.e., the notion that anyone who refused to accept Christianity or rebelled against Spanish rule could be enslaved, and rescat or ransom, the idea that Amerindians held captive by other groups could be purchased in order to Christianize them and to rescue them from captors who were allegedly cannibals. My bad. Okay.
No problem.
In most of the Caribbean, even before the mid 16th century, it was evident that Spanish colonization based on the mass forced labor of Amerindians was not a viable option. In addition to the demands of Spanish colonists, Old World diseases such as smallpox, measles, chickenpox, and typhus disseminated native population and reduced workforces to unsustainable levels. Interesting. Vocal advocates of reform, most notably Bartolome de las Casas, persuaded many in Spain that the abuses suffered by Amerindians at the hands of Spanish colonists were unacceptable on moral and religious grounds. Worried by the catastrophic decline of Native American populations and faced with growing oppositions to Spanish mistreatment of Amerindians, Emperor Charles V passed a series of laws in the 1540s known collectively as the New Laws of the Indies for the good treatment and preservation of the Indians, or just the New Laws. Among the first royal decrees issued in 1542 was the about abolition. I'm sorry. I'm seeing simple words and okay. Was the abolition of Amerindian slavery. Furthermore, Amerindians were no longer required to work without pay, and Spanish colonists' children could no longer inherit encomidia. Yeah, everything's up here. Encomidas. These changes were met with heavy resistance from colonists in Mexico and Peru, where some colonists possessed vast encomidas resembling small kingdoms, and because of their complaints, some of the new laws were only partially enforced in these colonies, and some traditional practices were partially reinstated. But in the Spanish Caribbean, Amerindians' rapidly declining population led Spanish colonists to look elsewhere for laborers long before the 1540s. With the Portuguese slave trade thriving, they increasingly looked to Africa. What? Wait. But in the Spanish Caribbean, Amerindians' rapidly declining population led to Spanish colonists to look elsewhere for laborers long before the 1540s. With the Portuguese slave trade thriving, they increasingly looked to Africa. Depiction of Spanish atrocities in the New World as recounted by Bartolome de las Casas in, what is that, narrative region Indicarum, indicating the Hispanos Quasdom. I don't even want to mess that up. Devastation, Quasdom, cause devastation. Narrative recounting, indication per Hispanos, cause devastation, Verissimo. I don't know that one. Engraving by Theodore de Bry, 1598. The early transatlantic slave trade, Nicholas Ovando. Give me just a moment, please.
No problem. Mic check 1 2 1 2.
Yeah, I apologize. Can you give me about a minute? I'm having a shush. Give me just a minute. I'm sorry.
We still here. Give us another minute. We'll be right back to where we left off at.
Okay, my bad. I'm back.
Oh no problem. But
I apologize. I really do.
now it was worth the wait. Trust me.
Huh?
The chapter that we on now, it was worth the wait. It's finna get good.
Yeah, my bad. I do genuinely apologize. Got stuff going on. Trying to get
Yeah,
stuff
it's
done.
been
We all. I don't know if anybody's regular at home right now.
Yeah.
Regular life at home. People out there listening. Oh, you at home for the first time in how long? Oh, your children.
Yeah.
You have to take care of them too. Not
Yeah.
only yourself. I understand. Trust me.
Yeah, it
Not
is.
paying
It's
for
crazy
self
because
at lunch hour anymore.
I don't think people understand that with everything going on, there's some things that are happening with colleges that people may not. Yeah. Okay. Education got to keep going. Okay.
Oh, like I said, it's worth the wait. It's finna be some double taking, brake pumping. Like what? Mm-hmm. Be a long, good conversation after this today.
Just be careful, be safe, okay? Okay. A letter from Spanish monarchs Fernando and Isabel to Nicholas Ovando, allowing black slaves of African descendants to be imported to Hispaniola, present-day Dominican Republic, and Haiti. The 16th of September, 1501. Courtesy of the Archivo General de Indias, Sevilla, Spain. The monarch reasoned that recent converts, heretics, and people of other religions would harm the American Indians' conversion to Catholicism. However, they permitted slaves of sub-Saharan African descent provided that they were born in Spain. This is the first known example of Europeans.
Oh, you just can't speed fast.
Look, that was a stop sign if I ain't never seen one, and I ain't
If
never
you
really
don't
seen
back
nobody get
up
the
and put that in reverse.
My bad. I just felt so
rolling
bad that
stop.
y'all were on. It was so quiet, and I wasn't. Okay,
And
my
I
bad.
tell you, it was worth the wait. There's so
Yeah.
many. Well, what moments coming up?
Okay. However, they permitted slaves of sub-Saharan African descent, provided that they were born in Spain.
So they had to be born where?
In Spain. Wouldn't that make them?
Spanish?
Yeah.
Hispanics?
Yeah.
Yes, it would.
That wouldn't make them Spanish African. That would make them Spanish, though, right?
Hispanic.
All right. This is the first known example of Europeans transporting black slaves across the Atlantic to work in the New World. Oh.
So your Africans that came technically wasn't Africans.
They were Spanish, but they were. Oh my goodness.
Oh, there's more.
Excerpt from in Spanish. The English translation is, because with great care we have procured the conversion of the Indians to our holy Catholic faith. And furthermore, if there are any still people who are doubtful of the faith in their own conversion, it would be a hindrance to them, and therefore we will not permit nor allow to go there to the Americas Moors, nor Jews, nor heretics, nor reconciled heretics, nor persons who are recently converted to our faith, except if they are black slaves or other slaves that have been born under the dominion of our natural Christian subjects.
What that law say again?
Man.
Yeah.
This law says, because with great care we have procured the conversion of the Indians to our holy Catholic faith. And furthermore, if there are still people there who are doubtful of the faith in their own conversions, it would be a hindrance to them, and therefore we will not permit nor allow to go there to the Americas Moors, nor Jews, nor heretics, nor reconciled heretics, nor persons who are recently converted to our faith, except if they are black slaves or other slaves that have been born under the dominion of our natural Christian subjects.
Well, look at what we got here. And there's more.
Nicholas Ovando was the first political leader to oversee the transatlantic slave trade to the Americas when he imported black slaves from Spain to the island of Hispaniola. Ovando was the third governor of the Indies, as Spanish documents typically refer to Spain's American colonies. After Christopher Columbus and Francisco de Bobadilla and assumed his post in 1502, the Catholic monarch charged Ovando with indoctrinating Amerindians, noting that as recent converts, they should not be allowed contact with Muslim, Jews, or Protestants. The monarchs therefore banned North African Moorish slaves from being transported to the New World, but allowed black slaves and other slaves who were born under Christian dominion, presumably meaning those born in Spain or Portugal, while the original 1501 charter between the Spanish crown and Ovando left open the possibility that some slaves shipped across the Atlantic might not be of African descent. Every subsequent letter exchanged between
How you just gonna run through that like that?
Okay, my bad. While the original 1501 charter between the Spanish crown and Ovando left open the possibility that some slaves shipped across the Atlantic might not be of African descent. Every subsequent letter exchanged between Ovando and Spain after 1502 referred to slaves exclusively as Negroes or blacks.
Referred to them as what?
Negroes or blacks. Now, what's interesting is that reading earlier, I think it was in the second link to this, or part 2 to this, black was not a reference to a complexion.
Correct.
I think, if I'm understanding this correctly, black was a reference to people, not by their complexion. And possibly
the caste system.
Yes. Because when he said, earlier when he said, we'll give you slaves, but we're not going to give you our people. They'll be black, but they ain't going to be our people.
Remember what they told you. And remember, in this paragraph, Moors, the term Moors and Muslims are interchangeable.
Mm-hmm.
Also, as in Moors and Jews and non-Christians, that's why you have to look at the context, how they're using it in the writing. That's why it helps when you have the original documents right in front of you.
Mm-hmm. Ovando at first resisted the transatlantic slave trade. When the first slaves arrived in Hispaniola, some quickly escaped into the mountains and began launching raids against Spanish settlements. What?
And now remember, these so-called Africans are not from the continent that they call Africa.
Correct.
They're from Spain.
Correct.
Or Portugal.
Right. In 1503, Ovando even petitioned the Spanish government to ban the transatlantic slave trade, arguing that if more black slaves escaped, they might incite the Amerindians into open revolt. The governor had good reason to be concerned. Not long afterwards, the island saw a major indigenous uprising known as Enriqueos Revolt, 1519 to 1533. I mean, that's more than a revolt. This revolt overlapped with a period of increasing African resistance and may have involved some collusion with the enslaved Africans.
I mean, right now, be politically correct.
You're breaking up, Bombs.
I said, if we were going to be politically correct, we can call them what we know they are now, Hispanics.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you might as well go ahead and read it. Told you, it's
Oh,
good.
my bad. Okay.
Enough
In,
apologies, folks.
in 1519, Enrique, one of the few remaining cacique. Oh,
Or indigenous chiefs.
yeah, cacique. Yeah, okay. In 1519, Enrique, one of the few remaining caciques or indigenous chiefs of the island of Hispaniola, removed himself and some of his people from the reach of Spanish authority. For nearly a decade and a half, he and his followers lived in the remote and barely accessible south central mountains of his native island, occasionally raiding Spanish settlements for arms and tools and clashing with militia units, but for the most part avoiding contact with Spanish society. Enrique eluded the numerous patrols that were sent to eradicate what became a stubbornly persistent locus of defiance of Spanish authority that attracted other discontented residents of the island, including both African and indigenous slaves and servants, as well as small numbers of nominally free Indians.
Is this what they called the Maroons?
Yeah,
But how they African if he's an indigenous Indian chief?
right. Enrique's revolt arguably was the best known rebellion of its time in the islands, at least in the history and literature of the Dominican Republic, where the episode is often portrayed as the last stand of a heroic leader of Hispaniola's remaining native Tainos. They had been all but eliminated as a result of the violence, flight, and disease that followed the imposition of Spanish settlement and rule. The famous and influential contemporary historian Bartolome de las Casas, perhaps better known today for his passionate defense of the rights of America's native peoples than for the lengthy volumes of history he has also produced, wrote of the rebellion sympathetically, romanticizing Enrique and portraying him as a principled and capable leader, committed to the defense of his people while avoiding unnecessary violence against the Spaniards. Okay, I'm going back because I got some reading to do. Yeah, that's more than a revolt. Letter from the Spanish monarchs Ferdinand and Isabel to Nicholas Ovando, Spain, 20th of March, 1503, courtesy of the Archivo General de Indias. So the Archive General in Indias. Sevilla, Spain, the monarchs on Avando's recommendation, banned the transatlantic slave trade. In the fourth paragraph from the top, the Spanish monarchs address Avando's concern that escaped black slaves might inspire the American Indians on Hispaniola to revolt, and on Avando's recommendation, Ferdinand and Isabel banned the transatlantic slave trade. Excerpt in Spanish, the English translation. Concerning the black slaves that you say should not be sent there to Hispaniola, because there they have escaped. Regarding the issue, we command that what you say be done. The governor changed his mind in 1505 and sent a request to King Fernando II for 17 slaves to be sent to the mines of Hispaniola. The king was even more ambitious than Ovando about using slave labor to increase gold productions, and sent 100 black slaves from Spain directly to the governor. 5 years later, the Negro slaves proved so effective that Ovando had 250 more slaves transported from Europe to work in the gold and copper mines. They came from Europe.
Where are these slaves coming from again?
Europe, Iberia, not the Americas.
They're not technically coming. They're not coming directly from Africa.
Correct.
These are people that were taken to Spain, mixed in with other Iberian slaves, and then brought to the Americas. Make no mistake about it.
The early transatlantic slave trade, Emperor Charles V. From 1501 until 1518, the transatlantic slave trade was comprised of black slaves transported from Iberia. Direct slave traffic from Africa was not initially permitted for the same reasons that colonists were repeatedly forbidden from bringing enslaved Muslims and Moriscos to the Americas. The Spanish crown worried that captives from sub-Saharan Africa might introduce non-Christian religious practices to Amerindian population. That's interesting. Though very little is known of the earliest slave trade to the Americas, the number of slaves transported during these years appears to have been comparatively minimal.
Mm-hmm.
And when they're talking about the Americas, they're actually talking about what we now call Haiti and Dominican Republic, right?
Yep.
They're talking about an island.
Yep.
As Hispaniola's once vibrant native population plummeted from 60,000 in 1508 to less than 20,000 10 years later. Okay, who's counting the people? It became clear that colonists had to import laborers in order to sustain the colony's gold placer mines and its nascent sugar industry. Echoing Ovando, Spanish colonists and administrators clamored for permission to import African slaves. In 1516, even Bartolomé de las Casas, the same Bartholomew.
Yeah, that's how
Really?
you say it. Mm-hmm.
Well, there we go. Okay. The same Dominican friar who fought tirelessly for the rights of Amerindians proposed replacing native labor with African slaves. whom he believed were better suited for harsh physical labor. Las Casas later recanted this opinion and dedicated a substantial part of his work, Historia de las Indias, the history of the Indians, to condemning the African slave trade and Iberian slave markets. Charter granted by Emperor.
Not more of his actual writings.
Yeah.
Oh, his words?
Mm-hmm. I'll read the English translation. Charter granted by Emperor Charles V to Lorenzo de Gorovod for permission to transport slaves, Spain, 18th of August, 1518, courtesy of the Archivo General de Indias, Sevilla, Spain, the archives. Before 1518, the slave trade was highly regulated and consisted mostly of slaves being sent from Spain to the Americas directly by the Spanish government. However, Emperor Charles V opened the transatlantic slave trade on a massive scale on August 18th, 1518, when he granted a charter to Lorenzo de Gorovod, giving him permission to transport 4,000 slaves directly from Africa to Spanish American colonies. He circumvented the legal statute established by Fernando and Isabel that slaves must have been born in Spain by allowing Africans to enter the Americas provided they convert during the voyage.
And remember, when they saying African, it's already noted that the majority of these people are not of African descent.
And this is 1518.
So if the majority of them are not of African descent in 1518, never mind.
This is 4,000 slaves directly. Okay, hold on. I need to read this. Okay, English translation. Our officials who reside in the city of Seville in our house of trade of the Indies, know ye that I have given permission, and by the present instrument do give it to Lorenzo de Goroved, governor of Brisa, member of my council, whereby he or the person or persons who may have his authority therefore may proceed to take to the Indies the islands and mainlands of the ocean sea already discovered or to be discovered. For 4,000 Negro slaves, both male and female, provided that they be Christians, in whatever proportions he may choose. And if the said governor of Brisa or the persons aforesaid who may have his authority should make any arguments with traders or other persons to ship the said slaves, male or female, direct from the Isles of Guinea, what? And and other regions from which they are wont to bring the said Negroes to these realms and to Portugal, or from any other region they please. That the said Negroes, male and female, having become Christians on reaching those islands, and how they have paid the custom duties there, in order that those taken be known and not in excess of the aforesaid number. Translation from Warder, William H. Nancy, L. Clark, and Edward Alters Alpers. Not sure what EDS is. Africa and the West, a documentary history, Volume 1, Oxford, United Kingdom, and New York, Oxford University Press, 2010, page 25.
And this is the thing. Remember, in the updated term, they say African, but in the original treaty, it says. And what do we know?
Say that again.
Negroes and blacks
Say that
did
again,
not.
please.
In the updated term, it says African, but when
Right.
you read it in their own writing, and in the translation, it says Negro.
Right.
It
Gotcha.
already
Okay.
stated earlier. It already stated earlier that the majority of these people were not from. They're not descendants of Africans. They said this in their own writings already.
Okay. Proof is not a problem. Okay,
But it's
thank you.
open the door for the possibility for the majority of them not to be of African descent. Oh, looking good.
All right. In 1518, Fernando and Isabel's grandson, Emperor Charles V, this is their grandson? Okay. Abolished the provision requiring slaves to be born under Christian dominion and issued a charter allowing 4,000 Africans to be purchased directly from Portuguese traders in the Cape Verde Islands and transported to the New World. So we're talking about the Turks, right?
Yeah. That's why I say again, in the updated version that we read in, it says African. But remember, in their original writing, it says Negro. And what do we know? It's because all these people that they were bringing, the slaves that they were bringing, the majority of them were not of African descent.
Right.
Remember, they were enslaving Iberians. They were enslaving everybody, mixing them together. And these slaves are having children. And once these slaves that's in Portugal and Spain have children, then those were the people that was being sent over to the Americas.
But even when you're saying when they're saying the Americas, they're not talking about North America. They're talking about an island.
Yeah. Haiti, Hispaniola.
Right.
Oh, wow.
Wait a minute. And one island got split into two.
Yes.
And that Cuba, Haiti.
Well, Dominican Republic and Haiti. But
Haiti, yeah.
Well,
if
don't ask
one
me.
island got split into two, as though they were two different. Oh, no.
Two different dominions.
Yeah, but they're not two different. They're not necessarily two different people.
Yeah, the people are the same people. You know what I'm saying? That's why I say again,
Yeah.
when you go through history, you got to remember the names come about when kingdoms and stuff merge together and they create a new title.
Right.
But the people are still the original people that always been there.
Mm.
That's why if you notice in this article, whether they talking about Portuguese or Spanish, they refer to them who they really are, Iberians, the Ottoman Empire.
Right. All right.
That's why we said get behind the pet names.
Mm-hmm.
It's your real name.
Okay, let me start from the beginning. All right. In 1518, Fernando and Isabel's grandson, Emperor Charles V, abolished the provisions requiring slaves to be born under Christian dominion and issued a charter allowing 4,000 Africans to be purchased directly from Portuguese traders in the Cape Verde Islands and transported to the New World. The first slave ships presently known to have sailed with captives directly from Africa to the Americas embarked from Cape Verde Islands and Sao Tome arriving in Hispaniola, Puerto Rico, and Cuba during the mid 1520s. You know, what I find interesting is that I'm only hearing about Spanish, Iberian, um, and Portuguese, but I'm not hearing about European colonies.
Because they don't even they're not even around. We still in the 1500s.
Right. The Iberian slave trade from Africa to the Caribbean expanded over the following decades. Decades is 10 years. With the Spanish crown selling licenses for specific numbers of slaves to individuals who would either arrange a slaving voyage or attempt to make a profit from reselling the same license to a third party. In many cases, Spanish migrants to the Americas acquired licenses to bring one or more enslaved people with them. And again, when they're saying the Americas, they're talking about the island, right?
Correct.
The crown increasingly relied on large-scale slaving ventures based on contracts or asintios, in which merchant houses agreed to transport a certain number of captives to Spanish American ports over a set period of time. Due to the participation of non-Hispanic merchants, especially the Portuguese during the 16th and early 17th century, which is the 15th and early 1600s, but also the Genoese and Germans, and later the English, French, and Dutch, the Asinto system helped to internationalize the transatlantic slave trade long before the establishment of non-Iberian colonies in the Americas or non-Iberian trading factories in West Africa. Asinto. Asinto. Hold on, let me see what that is.
And remember, they lumped the Portuguese and Spanish under the Iberians because that's what they are.
Right. Asinto de Negros. Between the early 16th and the mid 18th century, so early 1500s and mid 1700s, an agreement between the Spanish crown and the private person or another sovereign power by which the latter was granted a monopoly in supplying African slaves for the Spanish colonies in the Americas, which would be the island. The contractor, Asintista, agreed to pay a certain amount of money to the crown for the monopoly and to deliver a stipulated number of male and female slaves for sale in the American markets. The first such contractor was a Genoese company that
Basically, an Italian company.
okay in the 15 that in 1517 agreed to supply 1,000 slaves over 8 period. In 1528, an agreement was reached with a German firm to supply 4,000 slaves for its monopoly. 4,000 slaves. For its monopoly, the firm paid 20,000 ducats annually to the crown. Each slave was sold at a price not exceeding 45 ducats.
You know, I never thought about that term.
But you notice, still no records of no millions.
Okay, let me go back. Start next.
Like we said before, if you was transporting any slaves, you would have to have a license, and there's a record of it.
Give me a second. My computer's acting slow. My bad. I apologize. Wait, can y'all still hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I had to make sure everything wasn't messing up. Come on, be nice. Okay, let's try this. Shut another window. Okay. Um, okay. Non-Iberians were also heavily implicated in slave trafficking in the early colonial Spanish Americas as pirates, corsairs, and smugglers. By the mid 16th century, which is the mid 1500s, French interlopers raided Luso African outposts and captured slave ships in West Africa, transporting captives to sell covertly to Spanish American colonists. By the 1560s, English mariners would follow their example, likewise circumventing the Iberian monopoly. By the early 17th century, which is the early 1600s, early English colonies in the Americas began to rely on small number of enslaved Africans captured by privateers who preyed on Portuguese and Spanish shipping. In this regard, the Iberian slave trade connected to subsequent slave trafficking by other European nations and closely overlapped with early non-Iberian overseas expansion, colonization, and dependence on enslaved African laborers.
So if you getting them from the Spanish and Portuguese, then there's no guarantee that these people are African again.
This is correct.
Message.
Conclusion. While most of Western Europe did not practice slavery on a large scale in the centuries prior to the transatlantic trade, Iberia's historical ties to the ancient Mediterranean and North African slave trade provided the social and legal framework to use slavery as a major source of labor for the growing Spanish and Portuguese empires. Iberian attitudes towards slavery prior to the 16th century were also very different from those that would later develop in profit oriented American plantation colonies. The transatlantic slave trade from Portuguese outposts in Western Africa to Spanish colonies in the Americas was in many ways an extension of prior slaving practices in Iberia. And the documented exchanges between Iberian traders, politicians, and religious leaders during the early years of New World expansion provide invaluable insights into the earliest stages of how the enslavement of sub-Saharan Africans became a legitimized state-supported institution in the Americas. What does this say? View of the Elmina slave castle on the northwest side featuring Dutch flag, located on the Gold Coast of Guinea, present-day Ghana. Atlas Blue van der Hem, circa 1665 to 1668. The Portuguese began to construct Elmina Castle in 1482. The outpost would later become a major port of embarkation in the transatlantic slave trade to non-Iberian colonies in the Americas. The Dutch seized control of the castle in 1637 and continued slave trading from this site until 1814. And again, when they're talking about the Americas, they're talking about an island, right?
South America, because you got to remember, when did they have colonies in North America?
Not until 1600s.
1620.
Yeah.
It is 1620.
Spain's use of enslaved sub-Saharan Africans in its early Caribbean colonies set a precedent that was soon followed by other European powers. And beginning in the late 1600s, non-Iberian colonies developed forms of plantation slavery that would come to dominate much of the tropical Americas until the 19th century. So until the 1800s. Rather than directly copying Iberian attitudes towards slavery and Iberian forms of slave labor, Northern European colonization of places such as the English colony of Barbados represented a modification of Iberian traditions. Arguably, however, the body of European laws and customs that developed in support of the slave trade and the widespread practice of enslaving Amerindians and Africans as a significant labor force in the Americas was ultimately rooted in processes of Iberian expansion that unfolded during the 15th and these documents written at the dawn of the 16th century show how Iberian administrators and colonists rapidly came to rely on enslaved sub-Saharan Africans as a means of supporting large agriculture and mining enterprises in the Americas. Hold on. Okay. In the Americas, just 25 years after enslaved Africans were first transported from Spain to the island of Hispaniola, Iberians would launch the transatlantic slave trade from Africa directly to the Caribbean. Okay. This led to a system of forced migration that uprooted and transformed the lives of an estimated 12 million sub-Saharan Africans by the end of the 19th century, so by the end of the 1800s. However, rather than viewing slavery in the Iberian world as the direct root of rigid racial heresies and vast social inequalities enforced by European colonial powers all over the Americas during the colonial era, it should be remembered that in the late medieval and early modern Iberia, slavery was not associated with people of any particular racial category or ethnic background. At the same time, the Portuguese expansion and overseas commenced increasingly facilitated the export of captives from Western Africa. The Spanish crown's emphasis on limiting the spread of Islam ensured that enslaved laborers sent to the Americas would be sub-Saharan Africans rather than Iberian Moriscos or Muslims from Eastern Europe and the Mediterranean world. Other factors, most importantly, the dissemination of Amerindian population in much of the Caribbean also played a key role in determining that in the Spanish America after the 1540s, only sub-Saharan Africans would be enslaved. Ultimately, the connection between slavery and race did not fully develop into a rigid racial heresy until European colonization in the Americas. Portrait of an African man painted by Juan Masteret, circa 1525 to 1520, courtesy of Rajis Museum, Amsterdam. Painting demonstrates Atlantic Creole influence in the 16th century, which is the 15th in the 1500s Atlantic world, and the clothing worn by the subject of the portrait point to Spanish Portuguese origins or influences. The painting also just suggests that early depictions of Africans by Europeans were not necessarily derogatory, though this began to change with the increase of rigid racial heresies to support slavery during European colonization of the Americas.
Yeah, because you got to remember, before 1520, they all came from Spain or Portugal.
Now, I got a question, because in looking at this map, if I go off of what's considered sub-Saharan Africa now, it would be down here in this area. But Iberia is up here. Portugal, all that, it's up here.
But remember, the Iberian kingdoms expanded into North Africa.
Right.
So you got to remember where they tell you the slaves come from, West Africa. So you look to your west.
Yeah.
Where you see Sierra Leone and all that. That's supposedly where all the slaves came from.
What double cousin say? Who's your daddy?
And what does he do?
Because if you buying people who done bought people, you don't know who's to say them people are African again, even in their own records.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Like for real. What does it say? Lithographic plate. Plot. Plate. Showing harvesting of sugarcane on a Trinidad sugar plantation created by Richard Bridgens, 1836. Columbus first encountered Trinidad in 1498, and the island remained in Spanish hands despite a significant number of French settlers until 1797, when it became a British colony.
See, and that's the next thing. A lot of these colonies didn't become British colonies till,
Right.
like I said, where's the records of the British ever bringing slaves from Africa? Because a lot of these, sorry about that, I had a call come in.
Oh no, you're fine. Yeah. So, understanding history, origins, that tells gives a different knowing or a different understanding to what you think. Because again, original names, whether it's places and people, even to how it referenced to something being named one thing, and then now we know it as Ghana. What were the original names of the people's places? What were the events and what was actually happening? Because truthfully and honestly, which still goes to genealogy, because in genealogy, what I personally learned is that while I was pulling records for ancestors, I was also learning like, oh, okay, these people aren't this. This person isn't that. So what am I reading? I'm reading a better on what am I pulling? I'm pulling a better understanding of knowing origins. And don't dismiss what you find, regardless of what you find, who you find, where they're from. Don't dismiss it, because it still doesn't change that all these people, and over time, all these people came together, interacted, and you're here to find out the truth. So, and you're here to have a knowing and an understanding that you get to pass along and share with your children or the rest of your family, so that they know. Again, that's still knowing who you are. And once you know who you are, regardless of what someone or someone's or some things tells you, you know better. That ain't me.
Mm-hmm. But again, I have nothing against Africans and anybody who wants to claim to be an African.
Right.
All I'm saying is, how you gonna make all of us African when people, history, and records show that all of us ain't African?
Right. And to even read that, you know, there were certain words that were used that had nothing to do with where you were from, but it had probably everything to do with your religious beliefs or the culture.
Correct.
And again, it just in the first link alone, the first part of this alone said, look, you know, slaves were from the lightest of the light to the darkest of the dark. Don't trip. Don't use this current image you think you got.
Mm-hmm.
Which if you line that up with the current visual that a lot of people have with, okay, when they equate, okay, I hear the word slave, I automatically think a certain complexion and a certain type of people. No, you need to broaden that, because that had nothing to do. It wasn't how you looked. Look.
It's the same thing with Indian.
Correct.
Indian, if you think all Indians were dark, then you misinformed.
Correct.
Come from the lightest of light to the darkest of dark. And that's with all groups of people. All people come from the lightest of light to the darkest of dark.
Exactly.
There's no particular color description of a person. I mean, just look amongst your family. Everybody in your family the same shade? Nope.
Nope.
Even in your family, your
Nope.
are from the lightest of light to the darkest of dark.
Man, come on now. As nappy as I'm and as nappy as my great grandma wasn't.
Again, showing that we already know that the Indians were enslaved, and it's a part of history that up until recent times that's really not talked about too much.
Right.
But by showing the true version of the story that you were taught in school on what really happened, the names that was involved, it sheds more light on our true story as well, because it removes all the other images and labels that they put on you, because you know it does not pertain to you now. Come on, they find Indians all the way up to the 1900s. When you got time, let's stop playing. And even they numbers, you didn't bring millions to North America. So again, do your genealogy. Remember the timelines, because they are very important. What they say, person, places, and things.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we can go ahead and let the relatives get on about their day. It's about that time.
Celebrations.
I will have a talent today.
Peace to the panel, peace to the chat, peace to the silent majority. Census day was yesterday, but it does not mean that you can't still do the census. Do the census. Make yourself count so that you can count. Period. It affects funding. It affects all the changes. It affects everything. Schooling, hospitals, fire departments. It affects farming. It affects agriculture. So yeah, make yourself count so that you can count. It's just important. Again, aside from it saying it is required by law, make yourself count so that you can count. Same as having a voice. You're just putting it on paper or typing it in the links. It's the same as having a voice, having a say so. Continue on your genealogical journey. Know who you are so that no one can tell you who you are. I mean, just by reading, and going over what we went over today, I mean, there is a great misunderstanding that a lot of people have on who's who. So when now in 2020, when we hear African, what we should really be putting in our minds and placing in our minds, when they're saying African during this time frame, during these years, who are they referring to? Are they referring to the Iberians? What area are they referring to? Are they referring to the Turks? There's, I mean, I've heard it said before, but yeah, there's levels to this. So, again, continue on your genealogical journey. Know who you are so that no one can tell you who you are. And don't dismiss what you find, regardless of what it is. Again, all these ancestors, all these events, all these things, all these people came together to make up you, to know it and pass it along to your children and share it with your families so that they know who they are and no one can tell them who they are. Just saying, genealogy is key. Participation is key. All these things we can do as individuals and affect the person next to us, affect our families, affect our children in a positive way. There's nothing wrong with knowing. Again, you can't unknow what you know, can't unhear what you hear, you can't unsee what you see. So we as individuals, we are absolutely directly responsible with the knowledge that we obtain and what we do with it or not do with it, but we're still responsible. Just saying. So with that being said, again, peace to the chat, peace to the panel, peace to the silent majority. Shout out to Double Cousin for these wise words. Appreciate you. We are all mad here. MAD. Making a difference.
Or die trying.
To make a difference in someone's life, you don't have to be brilliant, rich, beautiful, or perfect. You just have to care.
Yep.
I can't fix the world's problems, but I will do what I can to make a difference where I am and when I can. We must become the change we want to see in the world. Success isn't about how much money you make, it's about the difference you make in people's lives. If you aren't making a difference in other people's lives, you shouldn't be in business. It's that simple.
Shut it down.
You're breaking up. You said what?
Oh, nothing.
If you desire to make a difference in the world, you must be different from the world.
One more time.
If you desire to make a difference in the world, you must be different from the world. Consider the postage stamp. Its usefulness consists in the ability to stick to one thing till it gets there.
I'm gonna take that for motivation.
You said what?
No, it's me. I just switched lines.
Okay, my bad.
You my bad. You know John Madden says, my bad. What's going on? My bad.
It's Wednesday, so I choose to make a difference. Making a difference always matters, even if it's to only one.
It's Thursday. All right. Even still, it's Friday.
And he who laughs last didn't get the joke.
And it'd be loud too. No, I'm joking.
And again, because even a record burns a needle, the difference between stupidity and genius is that genius has its limits.
Oh, you still be you a no limit soldier? It's not a diss to no limit either.
Oh, and yes, this episode will be uploaded. Time is processed today.
But of course.
And a committee is a group of people that keeps minutes and loses hours.
Say that again. What's a committee?
A committee is a group that keeps minutes and loses hours.
Lost a whole lot of hours keeping some minutes.
Mm-hmm. And lastly, it takes a lot of energy to be negative. You have to work at it, but smiling is painless. I'd rather spend my energy smiling and helping. Again, peace to the panel, peace to the chat, peace to the silent majority. Have a beautiful day.
Peace to the chat. Glad everybody tuned in with us today. Mic check, mic check, mic check, mic check.
1 2 1 2.
Get these timelines correct, man and woman. Yeah, we need to definitely be tapping into this information here, as well as the census still being in play. It was not just yesterday. It's today, tomorrow. Until you fill it out, it's there. You know they're gonna send it to the house. You don't fill it out online anyway. So fill out the census. Hit us up for any questions, comments, concerns, and or corrections about the census if you would like to. We are definitely willing to hear whatever you have to say. attentionassembly@gmail.com. Check out the website. Man, them colors is popping. Check out the information on the forum. Oh my goodness, man. Bones. All right. Bones. But yeah, shout out to the chat. Shout out to the panel. Peace to A2. Peace to everybody in A2. That's all y'all. Peace, y'all.
Alrighty. Thanks again, Gabriel and No Sellout. The work you put in on the show every rising. Also thank the active chat and the silent majority. Everyone coming together to keep the show what it is. And today we get this information to pull back the layers on who we are not, to show that all the different labels and categories of people, how it does not pertain to us. That our story is blended in between a mix of a whole bunch of other people. They got thrown in the pot. But by separating everything that was taught and showing the truth, in the end, you have your true identity left. So again, continue to work in your communities, continue to access the programs
that you can use today to make your community better tomorrow. Also, participate in the census. Realize it is very important to the growth of your community. It is very important to the resources that are allocated, especially with 10 years dealing with this census. It is also important with the representation, not just federally, not just in your state, but also locally where you reside. Continue to work on your genealogy so you can continue to remove all the false labels that history try to put on you. And you can find out where you come from and eventually who your people call themselves. So until we link up to the next Rising Show, remember we love you and peace.
Okay, I got one. Well, I got two. Learn from the mistakes of others. You can never live long enough to make them all yourself. And learn to appreciate what you have before time makes you appreciate what you had. Peace, y'all.
Peace, y'all.
Warning, warning, warning. Hard hats, pickaxe, shovels, boots required.